Welcome back to the Peak Sports Psychiatry Podcast, where we explore the mental side of sport, performance, and personal growth. Today's guest is someone who brings real wisdom, energy, and practicality to the mental health world, and especially to the world of athletes. Dr. Heather Larkin is a licensed clinical psychologist, mental performance consultant, and the author of The All-In Mindset, a book that gives athletes, parents, and coaches the tools to develop a healthier, more sustainable approach to sport and life. Her work blends evidence-based techniques, sports insight, and a refreshing dose of honesty. In this conversation, we dig into her book, talk about how to support athletes from both clinical and parental perspectives, and explore how the right mindset can unlock more than just performance. It can shape who you are beyond the scoreboard. Heather, Dr. Larkin, we are thrilled to have you. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. This is a pleasure, definitely.
So I got to ask, I just want to run right in with the book. So the All-In Mindset's been making the rounds. What inspired you to write it?
So I've worked with a lot of athletes, and what I found in working with high school athletes is that they really don't know how different playing at the collegiate level is. And unfortunately, no one really prepares them for that. So I was seeing some really talented athletes kind of crash and burn when they got to the college level. So I said to myself, this is a real issue, because I remember when I played basketball in college, I remember sitting there and being like, what did I get myself into right now? What is going on? And I realized I didn't have the mental side of the game to be able to process through and figure out what is happening. How do I need to change myself, change the way that I'm thinking about it? And unfortunately, torn rotator cuff got in my way, but I'll be completely honest. I'm not sure I would have stuck it out. That's a hard thing to accept and to be able to acknowledge.
So let's pause there. I would want to hear more about your background. I sense a tad bit of Boston in that accent
Oh,
of yours.
Boston.
It's just a little bit of Boston. Tell me about where you're from, where you trained, what's your day-to-day sort of your work? Obviously, you've been recently doing a ton of writing, but kind of give us a little bit more of that background.
So I am from Boston, and go Celtics. And
Well,
you know,
we're fine with it here. It's okay.
I started out an accounting major because that's what my dad told me I needed to do. You need a skill, Heather. And I dropped the class right before my final exam, changed my major to psychology. Never told him until graduation day. And my mother knew, and she was sitting in the audience with my father, and my father's like, I don't see Heather. She's like, oh, she's here somewhere. And so when I got my degree, he looked at me and said, what are you going to do with that degree? I said, I don't know, but I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to figure it out. And I started working with kids, and I started really working with kids in foster care. And it really, that to me was one of the biggest eye-opening experiences, coming from a family with two parents to managing that. And it taught me a lot about how kids think and how they react. And so I worked in the school system for 28 years, going as high as assistant superintendent in New Bedford, Massachusetts, which is one of the largest districts in the Commonwealth. And when my youngest son was graduating from high school a couple of years ago, I said, I'm done. I'm done. I've put in my 28 years. I'm done. And I went back to my roots, back to my counseling. And I started working in Boston, and I started really connecting with the athletes. And I met a couple mental performance coaches, and they really inspired me and brought me to the place where I opened my own practice. And it is half, I do mental health counseling with individuals, and I do performance consulting and coaching with athletes. What I have found is there's a real connection there. So I may enter a session or enter a therapeutic relationship with an individual and think I'm dealing with just a little performance anxiety. Well, when I peel back the layers, I find it's much deeper than that. And it has been that way for many, many years. And it doesn't matter if I'm working with a middle schooler or with a pro. There's so many commonalities and themes that run rampant through the competitive environment. So I started really doing it. And then I said, I can do more. And I started All In. Now I have individuals working under me, coaches and clinicians. and we're making a difference. I know we are.
Dr. Larkin, there's so much wisdom packed in there. I got to jump in, Mark, and ask,
Go for it.
what ages do you like to work with? And then the follow-up is, when you peel that onion, at what age does it get harder? Do they start to kind of harden their layers where it's harder to pull back, and then they become more vulnerable as they get older?
Yeah, so it really varies. So sometimes my middle schoolers, and even I had a couple in elementary school, and they're a hoot. They really are a hoot. But it's remarkable because they're just so open. Their minds are so wide open to so much more than an adult's mind. So when I'm working with a professional athlete, there's some variation in that, because if we're talking about mental performance, oh, I've done that. Yeah, I tried that, right? But the high school players, the prep school, the college players, they're my favorite because they're so hungry and they want to get to that level so badly, they'll do anything. But when it comes to mental health, on the other hand, for some of my professional athletes, they're more open to not necessarily having all the answers. And it's sometimes through that avenue that I'm able to bring in the performance stuff and actually teach them a thing or two. Because so it varies, and it's really the ones who want it the most, no matter what age they are, find such wisdom, as you said, in just this work. They've never thought about things the way that I teach them to think about things.
So you bring up a few things, but I want to clarify something for the audience, just in case that they're unaware. So you are both a licensed clinical psychologist and a mental performance consultant. Two very separate things, not mutually exclusive. They very much can assist each other. But since you do both, how do you actually meander the field of mental skills work and mental health work? But can you first explain the difference between the two so that we know what's going on?
Sure, absolutely. So when I'm doing mental health work, clinical work, that is, there is a diagnosis. There is an issue with their mental health. Primarily, I deal with a lot of anxiety, depression, mood disorders, ADHD, kind of adjustment type situations. And so that is great because I bill insurance. It doesn't really cost them a whole bunch, right? Just their copays. And it's really focused in on their psyche and their ability to understand what's happening to them. Oftentimes, somebody struggling with mental health, they don't know what's happening to them. They know it's not right. It doesn't feel good, but I don't have any clue on how to make it stop. Whereas mental performance is usually it's tied to a specific area in their athletic arena, if you will. So if somebody is coming off of an injury and they're a little fearful to get back into it, or they're very rigid with their expectations and they need to kind of get over themselves. You want the honesty? You got to get over yourself and really work to figure out simply, how can I be better tomorrow than I was today? How can I get better control over a world that I have absolutely no control in? How do I control myself? And how do I build skills to be able to perform at a level that, regardless of what team I'm playing, who's guarding me, what the last score of last games was, regardless of any of that, they're there, they're locked in, they're ready to play. And if something does go wrong, they have the instant ability to reframe those things and reset.
I think it's really important to note, mind you, Dr. Horn and myself, we're both psychiatrists, and so we have a little bit of a bent to the whole equation, and we look at maybe the iceberg, seeing kind of what's below the surface. Now, that doesn't mean that mental skills work doesn't have a place. It absolutely does. And in fact, I think it masqueraded for a long time as being the only ways. It was like the only destigmatized way to get mental health support from a team is if you saw a mental performance consultant who then recognized it and then turfed you to the right person. Am I wrong in that? Challenge me on this to explain, because I know, at least in the field of sports psychology, as an observer, there's definitely a couple of camps. Folks that do that mental skills work and those that do not. But at least, as an observer, having gone to the Association of Applied Sports Psychology meeting, the amount of content that's mental health related has steadily increased over the years. Mm-hmm. So does that make sense?
It does make sense. It does. And I try not to get into the debate, if you will. for me, I want to be able to provide athletes with every possible thing to help them succeed. And I feel very strongly, not only with athletes, but in my mental health practice, is that it's not always talk therapy or skills training or cognitive behavioral, whatever, isn't always going to cut it. Some people need that next level, need some medication to kind of level the playing field, to put them in a position where they can access the therapy. So that I think is really important. And I think that having that combo, having that team behind them is so, so important. And unfortunately, even in the Boston area, that is sometimes lacking. It's hard to find a psychologist or a psychiatrist that understands sports, has been in their shoes, has lived their life, have thought really crappy things about themselves when they don't do well, right? Like we've all been there, have been on a dreaded car ride home, which is part of the work that I do with parents.
Mark, we're talking about windshield time again. That keeps coming up, and I'm not a child psychiatrist. I'm an adult psychiatrist, but I still feel like having 5 children, I know about windshield time and what goes on there and how important it is to connect with them. But you guys are hitting on such important topics: mental health versus mental performance, surrounding yourself with a team of people, usually a multidisciplinary team, treatment team, but also just individuals, coaches, et cetera, who are about supporting that person and that holistic care. I guess where my mind goes, and I'm curious, Dr. Lark, your book, was it written in a way that kind of blends mental health and mental performance? Or are you really talking more about performance when you talk about an all-in mindset? Can you separate the two?
Okay. Yeah. So the all-in mindset is really geared towards athletes, right? But I say that, but it's just good for everyone. The belief that, I'm going to go all in. I'm going to do everything in my power to produce the best product possible, to play my best in every situation, to be present in my relationships with people, to put effort and time into the things that matter to me. And so that entails the ability, the cognitive flexibility to be able to be authentic to me, myself, and not compare myself to others or try to be like someone else, to be locked in and focused, especially when obstacles and negativity is being thrown at you from either the media or your parents, or, you hear something, you get benched, whatever the case may be, right? And then living in the present moment. And that means playing in the present moment too. So I feel like that's incredibly important. But then the intensity, the I is the intensity, that intense, driven desire to give it everything you've got. And then there's no excuse. You can never give up, no matter what. You can't give up. And so that, to me, my clients can take that onto the court, can take that onto the field, can take it into the classroom, anywhere they go, just thinking in those ways. I'm not going to give up. I'm going to keep trying. I'm going to get back up. I'm going to do it again. I'm going to do one more, whatever your philosophy is. And I feel like, and I'm probably getting away from the actual question, but I feel like that is incredibly powerful, not only for when I explain that concept to my therapy clients, it makes sense to them. And even when I am talking with my athletes, I'll sometimes bring in some what were originally clinical strategies, right? Grounding strategies, breathing, meditation, all of those things that are now such commonplace in the performance world also. So there are some intersections, and probably because I have a difficult time staying in my lane, I like to go in each lane and kind of like pull things from various sources and kind of just be eclectic in the way that I approach the work.
I think it's golden. Mark, I apologize. I'm on a
You're on
run
fire.
here, but you're talking, and Mark and I started the American Board for Sport and Performance Psychiatry with some colleagues from around the country. And so when you talk about sport and performance is not just athletes, but it is fun to watch athletes. By the way, Jason Tatum, played basketball just down the street from me here. So go Celtics. I think on that, though, we talk to high performing individuals, whether they be physicians, athletes, business, whatever. sometimes that mindfulness that you're talking about and those strategies, it's sometimes sabotaged by this intense perfectionism. And we see that in athletes. What do you say to those folks that, hey, I'm all in, but it's almost like they can't be all in the moment because they're too perfectionistic?
So common. Oh my God, so common. And the first thing I tell them, there is no such thing as perfection. I have a perfect example. I have a young athlete. She's a remarkable young lady. She's going to be a junior in high school, but in her sophomore year, she's already at like 971 points. She made the All-Star team. She brought her team to the state tournament, first time in like 11 years, and she's a sophomore. And when I first met her, her mother was like, she's going to be a tough one to crack. And I was like, okay. So her first expectation of herself is, I must score 20 points in every game. Like, oh, okay. So what happens if you don't? I suck. I'm a loser. I failed. I'm like, so if you score 18 points, but you get 12 rebounds, 6 assists, and 4 steals, is that a good game? No. Okay. All right. So for her, it was just shifting that perspective, right? Like, I'm like, okay, what if we do this? What if we go from I must score 20 points in this game to I want to average 20 points this season? Still the same thing. However, you might score 38 in one game, but you might only score 14 in another. But that's okay, right? That's okay if you're still averaging. And it took her, like, I could see like her like twitching as I was like trying to explain this, but she embraced it and she challenged herself to really think that way. Well, she ended up averaging 26 a game because she trusted that process. She trusted, if I do the things I know how to do, if I trust my skills and I continue to work hard, I'm going to get there. And she did. She exceeded her expectations. But if we didn't shift that perspective and she didn't score 20 points in a game, she would go home, she would cry, she would like fight with her parents. She was a disaster. So her parents are very thankful of me right now because it turned out better. So yeah, sometimes it's just a shift in perspective. Sometimes it is drilling and drilling and drilling. And when I meet with them and they say something, I'm going to challenge them. Wait, okay. But what if we get up on the balcony and we look down at that situation from a different vantage point? How do you think do you really think that person was saying that kind of stuff about you? Or do you really think that, yeah, dad maybe turned up the heat a little bit on the car ride home, but do you think he hates you? Do you really think he hates you? So just helping people to see their thought is not always the answer. And I try to get people to think about and accept that anxiety, depression, those things lie to us. They tell us things. And if we're not strong enough to punch it in the face and challenge it and change it, we're going to be stuck in that situation.
You've given a lot of advice to different athletes and families, and sports parenting is definitely a theme in your work, basically. What kind of advice do you find yourself giving over and over and over and over again? And also, when does it go from being like a parent having healthy ambition to like overdoing it?
So I've never met a sports parent who didn't love their child to the ends of the earth. And I've never met a sports parent who really doesn't like watching their child compete. Inadvertently, though, sometimes their tone, their desire to be another coach, their fear that this is the big one, their fear that the other parents will look at them in a certain way and question their parenting when their child doesn't perform well. That's a huge one, and it's one that I had to really wrap my head around. Like, how does your child's impact you as a parent? And one of them said to me, well, I don't want these other people to think that I don't have control of my kid. So that is a real mindset shift for the parent. So my latest book, The Car Ride Chronicles, How to Avoid Those Dreaded Car Rides Home, takes examples of all my clients, well, some of my clients, and has a little scenario of a bad car ride. And it goes into the brain science of it. What is really happening in that young person's brain? Or high school or college. They all tell me that they have the dreaded car rides home. It often puts them in a fight or flight situation where they're either tuned their parent totally out staring out the window. I'm not acknowledging you, which infuriates the parent even more because in their mind, they're just trying to help, or they just fight. Constant friction. And there's usually one parent, usually the mom, who's sitting there like not knowing what to say, pissed, mad at her husband for even upsetting their child. And the father is like, no, he needs to hear this. He needs to hear this. Well, he already knows he messed up. You don't need to drill that into him over and over again. So I really try to help parents help their child own it, be accountable to themselves so that they get to a point where they're analyzing their own performance and they're determining for themselves, what do I need to change? So I adopted this from Brian Cain, but I use the stop, start, continue method constantly with athletes at every single level. And it really gets them to think about, instead of everything flying in their head, like, I sucked, I'm the worst player ever, my teammates hate me, my parents are mad, to just 3 simple things. What's something you did you need to stop doing? And what's one thing you didn't do, you better do it next time. And then always end on that positive note. What did I do really well that I want to continue doing in the next practice, next game? Because that positive thought is what you leave with. Because you're already so thinking negative, you have to insert some sort of positivity in that. And so I have all my clients, I give them a journal and they do it after every practice, every game. And the parents are like, I didn't know they understood. I'm like, oh, they understand more than you think they understand.
Heather, just to clarify, do the parents do it with the kids?
So I first try to teach the child that so that they know how to do it. And then I teach the parent. And so instead of having, you did this wrong, you should have done this. Why didn't you play like Tyler? Why don't you do this? It's all right. So what'd you think about the game? All right. So let's do it. Let's do our little exercise. What's something you feel like you did, but you shouldn't have done? All right. You know what? I saw that too. That makes a lot of sense. So, okay, let's do that. And just talk with your child, not at your child.
And the all or nothing thinking, the cognitive distortion, if you will, is stronger in the parent or the child, depending on what level the child is at with their performance. What do you think?
Parents have a lot of cognitive distortions. They do. But I feel like as young athletes, they absorb so much of the messages that they're being told or hearing, maybe not even being told it, but they're hearing. And I've had some athletes say, my parents don't think I can hear them, but I know that they talk about me constantly. If they're not telling me, they're telling each other, and I hear it. And so those things sink in. And sometimes we recognize it, sometimes we don't.
And I've got a 14-year-old tennis player. I'll make this personal for a second.
Okay.
What a lonely sport tennis is. You're out there by yourself most of the time. What's the difference? Where's that line between me supporting and pressuring? I want to push him, but I don't want to push him too much. What do you tell parents who are trying to figure out where that line is?
So I often tell parents that sometimes I get a lot of buts on this one, but your child has a coach, and that coach is there to coach them. You are that child's parent. You are there to parent them, right? And so support, maybe we just need to shift your definition of what that support looks like. If your child knows that regardless of how many points they score, or if they fumble the ball or what have you, or they lose a match, they're still one of your favorite people in the whole wide world. You love them tremendously. And how can I help you? How can I help you figure out what to do next? Talk to me. You know what I mean? And it's really in that communication. But I find that, and I don't know if it's due to COVID or what have you, communication amongst people really lacking in a lot of ways, right? Like active communication, positive communication. I've told one parent, I'm like, well, text them, text your child to try to get their attention. Because that's sometimes the only language that they understand. But it's like really meeting them where they're at, not what you want. And sometimes I'll ask a parent, whose dream is this? Is it your child's dream or is it your dream?
You made a disparity between the parent and the coach. What happens when the parent is the coach. And to sidebar, I have 2 young kids and I'm about to go into my own sports parenting journey, which is great. Finally, I have to experience it myself. Tommy over there has 14 kids, and so he's done this a few times. He's got 5 kids. Yeah, and a 14-year-old tennis player. So what is the oldest age that's still appropriate to coach your own kid? I know there's probably some caveats to that. Not everybody is King Richard, but I'm just curious how this goes.
So I'll tell you a story. So I grew up playing basketball. My dad was my coach. He made me play in an all boys league and he would call timeouts, timeout, timeout. And the whole team would go over and we think oh, he's going to run a new play. No, that was not why he called the timeout. He called the timeout to inform me and everyone else that I was playing like a girl. And so, but hear me out. That's what I needed, right? But that's not what every child needs. And so went from basketball to track. And I used to live in North and South Carolina. So we lived right outside of Clemson in South Carolina. And I used to run in track meets at Furman University. And it was like a weekly thing, right? And so every week we'd be driving down the highway. I'd be like, Dad, pull over, throw up, right? Every time. And I was state champion at age 10, 11, state champion in the quarter mile, half mile, and 1,500 meters. So,
Okay.
but I don't run at all anymore. Never. So I was like, I'm so nervous, but I didn't know what to do with it. So in my father's wisdom, he said to me, Wilt Chamberlain used to throw up before every game. You're in good company. Means you really want it bad. So coming to thinking about that now, you know what it was? It was anxiety when it doesn't have any knowledge or any skills or any strategies to manage it, right? So that's what happens. Our bodies take over and it becomes more somatic than anything else. And so I always thought it was okay to throw up, but now I'm like, I could have avoided all that shit, right? I could have avoided that if I just had the skills. Every time he told me how to get your head in the game, I didn't know what that meant. I had no idea what that meant, but now I do. And now it's my mission to help other kids and other athletes at whatever level to be able to recognize that and to be able to learn how to think about the way we think, reset, catch it, let's go, ground yourself, breathe, all of these things. So when the time comes, it's instant. It's like muscle memory. I got this.
Gosh, I love your honesty and just how you phrase it. Of course, it's got a Boston flair to it. By the way, Mark, this is the second time we said shit on the podcast. That was me last episode. I used it, so we'll keep using it. We can cut it if you want. I'm going to tell my daughter, I coach my daughter in softball, 5th grade. It's the best. They're pitching, they're stealing bases. I think you said punch it in the face. So any one of these emotions that you're talking about where as a child or adolescent or even as an adult, you're like, hey, this is uncomfortable. I don't know what to do with this. It becomes somatic. I kind of like that visceral punch it in the face or something like that. You're externalizing it. You're making it something tangible that you can manage.
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever, I'm going to shift into what happens when symptoms become severe? You're talking to a couple of psychiatrists. We deal with a lot of somatic stuff day to day with our patients. With athletes, where's the intersection between mental health, mental performance, psychology, psychiatry? What's your experience been there with the medical side of things? And how do we as psychiatrists help you and help all these patients who are out there, all these athletes that are out there?
So I feel strongly, again, the more people that we can get to surround these athletes is important. And sometimes what I found with even my pro clients, they have access. They have access to some of the best professionals. However, they're not necessarily want to share that stuff with the organization's providers. In their mind, it shows weakness. It shows I don't need them knowing my business, those types of things. And so having a confidential person to go to cry to be upset with and not be judged and not be looked at as less than, but being able to challenge them in a way that you don't have to think about yourself, the way that you're thinking about yourself. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're weak. I challenge the fact that people who come out and are honest about their mental health issues or about their fears of failure, they're stronger than the rest. Right? That takes some real courage and some real, ability to be real, be authentic. And so I find that sometimes I have to work on, and we touched upon this at APN, is the athlete's identity, right? When it's so wrapped up and entangled in how I play determines who I am and whether I'm good or I'm bad. And separating those things is sometimes challenging, sometimes really challenging, especially when it is tied to their livelihood, their family's livelihood, their extended family's livelihood. Like the pressure on them is tremendous. But what happens? What happens when that happens and one mistake goes wrong, or they get traded to another team, or they get injured, or what happens? Mental health issues rise, substance abuse rises, additional increased injuries happen, all of these things. And so I always try to attack it from, I care about you, the person. I don't give a crap about how you play. That doesn't affect the way that I look at you. And really challenging those irrational thoughts again. How do you know? Are you a mind reader? You know that these people are like upset with you? No, you're not. But this work is just so, I should have done this like 25 years ago. I would have saved myself a lot of headaches, but I didn't know what I didn't know. So it's, but just to get back to the question about when should you coach, I think it's really cool when parents coach their kids at a young level. And at that age, it changed, right? Like my husband coached my son in football when he was 5. And it was so cute. And we used to laugh and it used to be fun. And we'd be like, look, he fumbled. It's so cute. And right. And then they get older and everything starts to shift. And that coach who was very supportive and like into like teaching and, getting over mistakes now is like, I taught you better than that. You know not to do that. And it just starts with little comments like that start to tell me, maybe it's time for you to step back, right? Maybe it's time for you to now be the parent and not the coach.
The Aspen Institute's Project Play actually has sort of like this developmental stages of sports participation. And I was kind of wondering if maybe it's when they shift from sort of experiencing a broad range of sports, sort of that, trying lots of things before they go to playing trying to play a single sport and perfecting that. If that's maybe when the switch from coaching your own kid to having someone who this is what they do, not being overly involved and just simply trying to inject joy into the experience. You touched on a ton of themes a second ago related to athlete identity, the athletic cliff, transitioning out of sport, all things that we could talk about it for an entire podcast episode. But since, you and I met for the first time at an athlete-specific residential program in the middle of nowhere, Colorado, which was beautiful. This is All Points North, so I'll give them a little bit of a plug. And the reason it existed was that they had an athlete-specific program that could kind of speak the language so that they could feel that these folks from all over the country could feel comfortable coming in, that they knew that their experience, their lived experience at that point wouldn't be lost. It wouldn't be lost on the providers they're working with, i.e. the three of us on this call. That's exactly why we got into this. So you mentioned yourself, Dr. Larkin, you had lived experience as an athlete yourself back in the day. I mean, my gosh, how many awards did you win? And then you're saying, man, I wish I'd done that a long time ago. Well, through your work, you picked up all these tools and tricks. My gosh, you're a licensed clinical psychologist. And you're doing what you need to be doing now.
Yeah, we're at an interesting time in sport that it's not well defined, whether you're a psychologist or a psychiatrist or and any other degree out there. But the cool thing is that it is being defined right now, and people like yourself and your writings, that younger people who hopefully are going to be part of the audience for these types of things are going to be able to find out, what am I interested in and how do I go down that path? You're trailblazing, I think, as many in the field are. The piece of advice you were talking about how you wish you knew things when you were 10 years old winning state championships, which is just unbelievable. If you had to give one or two pieces of advice, what would you say?
If it stops being fun, you need to rethink things, right? And I don't mean rethink things and quit. I mean rethink things in a way that, how can we help you find that joy that you had when you were little? And you know what? You know what gets in the way of that joy is pressure, is unnecessary pressure that maybe they put on themselves, or maybe it's extrinsic, but pressure negatively impacts joy of play. It really does. Because when you're little, you don't care. You're just out there having fun with your buddies, right? And so always try to find joy. Always try to have fun when you're out there playing, even if it's, your own definition of fun. Well, I have fun when, some people are like, I have fun when I score, or I have fun when this. Well, is it not fun when you don't score? Well, yeah, it's not really fun. So that's an issue, right? But I'm talking about the athletes who are really not having fun. They are fighting their parents to even have to go to practice. They are, when they're at practice, they're half in it. They're half out. They're like somewhere else. Those types of situations that just impedes everything. So have fun. Find a way to have fun. And again, don't believe everything you think.
I was just thinking about many pro athletes who were sort of pushed into sports specialization at an early age. And I might be quoting it wrong, but like Andre Agassi, I don't think he ever really had joy in the sport until like much later in his career. Maybe I'm wrong, Tommy, the tennis player on this call, but like there's countless stories of that where kids were pushed and pushed and pushed and kind of lost that joy, but they were good at it and they stuck with it because they also didn't know in themselves outside their sport that identity was already fused. So it was like even harder to quit, or not quit, but like maybe find something that, or inject something else that had joy into their life at that time. But these are also kids we're talking about. Like, they're supposed to be, professional students to a degree, learn how to be good humans, live in a family system. Sports are a very healthy way of dealing with their youth as learning about socialization and healthy lifestyle modification, all that good stuff. But when it becomes everything and it's an all or nothing situation and you have an overbearing parent or guardian figure, it can be toxic.
It can. One of the things I do, and I just started doing this because it was actually, my sister came to me and said, you need to work with Alex. He's my nephew. He plays lacrosse and baseball. I'm like, yeah, sure. All right. And Alex, talking about identity again, right? And this is how young it starts. He's 11 years old. Alex doesn't believe that he can do certain things, right? Or that he has weak areas and he doesn't know what to do with them. But his wolf, his alter ego, that Mamba mentality, if you will, right? That black Mamba, he can do all the things that Alex doesn't feel confident in. But the wolf doesn't know everything either. And he needs Alex to help him understand things too. So it was so crazy. So he loved this, right? He looked for pictures of his wolf. I had him write characteristics of, what does your wolf have that you don't have? And what do you have that the wolf doesn't have? And how can you bring it together? Well, I'll tell you what, the wolf scored a hat trick Saturday, and he got in the penalty box twice because he was so aggressive, but not in a bad way. But that was one of the things. He's like, I don't really feel aggressive. I don't want to hurt anybody. I don't want anybody to be mad at me on the field. Sometimes I'm just not aggressive, but the wolf was. So, and he did acknowledge in his little 11-year-old self, I might have taken it a little too far on that one, but it gives young kids kind of the ability to be like, okay, I want to emulate these characteristics. I'm not sure how, but if I call upon my spirit animal or my alter ego, it's almost like Superman, right? He goes, puts on his thing, he can do anything. And so that sometimes is the start. And then I get them to let go of that animal. Because guess what? You don't need it all. You're not going to always need your animal. You've got this. You too can, play intensely and aggressively and score 3 goals. So I just like to have fun.
Everybody's got that though, don't they? Everyone has maybe core beliefs that might be down there and be negative, but everybody's got something they can tap into. You see, I'm thinking about the players who find that it's their faith, it's their, I can do all things through Christ, whatever it may be, something to tap into that's greater beyond themselves, or, a spirit animal. That's so cool. I got to use that with my kids.
Yeah.
I'm going to.
I told my sister, I'm like, you need like a call now. Whenever he scores, you need to be like, oh, and like get the whole place going.
And then the parents can get into it and kind of let go a little bit and count on that themselves. That's amazing. I took a group of second graders to the wolf sanctuary a couple weeks ago and we howled at the wolves. And, when the kids did it, it was fun. But when the parents did it,
It was
that's when it
powerful,
really
wasn't it?
got fun because then the kids see that and they feed off of it. And it's just this cycle of healthy energy.
Yep.
That's so
You
cool.
just said it. Kids feed off of our energy.
Yeah.
And so if we can't let go of a mistake or a missed shot, how can we expect a kid to?
Positive or negative energy, they're definitely going to feed off the negative energy.
Mhm.
And I think your writing is more to the parent than the young child. But as they get older, it's applicable to anybody in performance. Just really, I think that's gold.
So,
Yes.
okay, Heather, are there any aspects to your day-to-day practice that you've not shared or like, because I'm still trying to like map out your week. I know you work with all kinds of individual clients. You had a chance to come see me out in Colorado. You do writing, but like, do you ever have any interface with like mental health professionals like myself, like a psychiatrist, during your typical work week? Tell me how that.
So during my typical work week, it depends on who's already part of the athlete support system, but I do have clients who are already seeing a psychiatrist for medication. And, I always make sure, like, if there's somebody else involved, I want that release. I want to talk to them. Like, let's figure this out together. I feel like it's so, so important because I don't know half the stuff that you guys know. And I want that. I want to know what you know. And I want to be able to, it's not about me. It's not about you. It's about the client. And so collaboration is one of the absolute necessary aspects to this work. Even if it's a physical therapist or a nutritionist, I'll talk with them too, just to find out, like, how can I support what you're doing? How can you support what I'm doing? So that's part of so the All in Mindset, the Car Ride Chronicles really speaks the same language so that when the athlete's saying, oh, I got to do my stop, start, continue, they know exactly what that is. Or can you help me reframe that thought? I can't figure out a good positive affirmation to use. Can you help me with that? And that parent or that coach is like, yeah, sure. Let's think about it this way. But I just did a basketball tournament. Chris Herron is right down the road from me. He was a Boston Celtic and he struggled with substance abuse. And so now he is doing so much great work working with young people to help them to stop it before it starts. And so he and his brother have this basketball tournament. And from there, I mean, there were D1 prospects from Connecticut, New York, everywhere. And I was curious. So I would go talk to them and I'd say, looks like you really train a lot. They're like, yes, ma'am, I do. I'm like, how do you train your mind? What's your strength and conditioning regimen for your mind? And they just looked at me like, what are you talking about? And they're going D1 and they don't know what this is. And then I'll say to coaches or athletic directors, what's your program do to support your athlete's mental health and performance? Well, we got our coaches, they'll talk to the kids. Really? What are the messages that they're sending? And it's remarkable to me that although it is growing, we are still so far away from making this commonplace, right? 15 years ago, not all high schools had an athletic trainer. Now they have to have an athletic trainer. And so that is my hope that someday schools will have their own mental performance counselor, somebody to support them in ways that a regular guidance counselor can't. And so that's what I'm hoping that this work is doing, is to help that. And I just founded my nonprofit too.
Do tell about
We're
your
going to
nonprofit.
ask, what's the nonprofit? What is that about?
So I founded a nonprofit. It's called Beyond the Game Foundation. And it was because as I was talking to these young people, I realized there's so many athletes out there that need this, but they don't have access to it, usually due to financial situations. And in Massachusetts, I mean, we have some major gateway cities where those kids are not going to be able to pay. right? Especially if they don't have an existing mental health issue where they can come and get counseling, and maybe I'll throw some strategies in there for them. So the nonprofit was formed in order for us to write grants and seek donations and sponsorships so that here in my home state, in Massachusetts first, not last, but first, anybody, any kid will have access to this work. And I feel like it's really important. And so oftentimes I'll just go do talks and, meet with AAU teams or youth baseball teams. I don't get paid for it. I just want to spread the word. So it's kind of my mission, if you will.
Love that. So where can an audience member find the All In Mindset, RA Chronicles, Beyond the Game Foundation online?
So the Beyond the Game Foundation isn't quite there yet. Okay.
Okay.
We're still in the planning phases of that, but the allinpro.com is my website. And so a lot of good information on there. My team and I, we write a lot of blogs just to kind of like certain situations that come up in our practice that we feel is important to share, like tone of voice. I did a whole blog on a parent's tone of voice. So the All in Mindset and the Car Ride Chronicles, they're both available on Amazon. And my Instagram is allin_mental performance.
Well, I know that our little windshield time segment probably borrow a little bit from the Car Ride Chronicles. I think that's great. A sidebar, a couple of my favorite old radio show was Rick Wolf's Sports Parenting Edge, Sports Edge, I think. It was for New York, which he always talked about sports parenting. I'm gathering that you have your own spin on things, which is fantastic. And then You Think with Greg Olson, another podcast, another great sports parenting resource. But for sure, I will send everyone your direction for the All In Mindset and Car Ride Chronicles. It's been awesome chatting with you. It's like a breath of fresh air. You were such a positive force when I met you in person in Edwards. Really great to chat with you over this. I'd love to chat again further in the future. Tom, anything else for you?
Dr. Larkin, thanks for being on. Thanks for being a friend to us and a friend to mental health professionals across the country through your work. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I enjoyed this so much. I got myself all ready. I did my breathing before. I listened to my little hype songs, right? What do you think my hype song is?
Mark, you guess first.
This is going to be rough.
I've got like jock jams in my head from
Yeah, I was saying like getting you.
Chicago Bulls or something. I don't know.
I don't know. What is it?
Starts off with Enter Sandman by Metallica.
Perfect.
Then we do a little Crazy Train, right? I love me some Ozzy. But then we veer off and we do some Tupac, some Eminem, and some Beastie Boys.
We've got some intro and some like fade out songs, for the podcast. Again, we'll have to.
So if we don't have any licensing issues, we'll totally throw that on the end of this episode. Wonderful chatting with you. Thank you very much, Tom.
Thank you so much.
Our guests week to week have been incredible, and the same themes kind of persist on reaching these athletes. The thing that stood out to me, I should say, Dr. Larkin and you have particular training and experience with kids at a young age, and that dynamic between the parents and the child and what goes on in between the ears and how they affect one another. That was really fun to hear about. I kind of see a lot of those athletes as they're getting older, reaching 17, 18, getting into all the things that can happen during that transition into college. That's a whole nother episode we could have with Dr. Larkin talking about mental health and the adjustment to college. But that's what stood out to me. Tons of actual practical takeaways that we can use with our own kids and family, but also just kind of observing things on the sideline. It's just amazing.
I completely agree with you. My wheelhouse of ages that I like to treat are somewhere between 15 to 25. Now, I'll see younger, I'll see older, but I love those developmental stages when they're making the jump from like high school to elite ball or college to pro, that kind of thing. But it all has to start somewhere. And you're right. Dr. Larkin was providing excellent, like granular advice about how parents can speak to their kids. It's translatable. The kids will respond well. She's also giving advice to coaching staff and parents two coaches between each other, all because everybody's goal is the same, is to help foster healthy development through sport. So I look forward to having a chance to read her new book and to also follow the development of her new nonprofit, which I think is great. Beyond the Game sounds like it's got a wonderful mission to help underprivileged kids access sport. So really, it was awesome chatting with her.
If only we could all be that relatable. Her vulnerability about her own experiences at age 10 and winning state championships at track and field, and then pausing to reflect on what's the advice you give to yourself at a younger age. And it just struck me, is it bringing you joy or not? If it's not, we need to reevaluate things. And, it's not always going to bring joy. I think becoming a professional at something is doing what you love on the days when you don't want to do it. How powerful is that for young kids? I look forward to seeing what her nonprofit does and supporting that work. And, I love how she's not afraid to use just relatable language. And she cursed, so I wasn't the only one on the podcast to have done that so far.
There is something to be said about being able to connect with your patient population. In this situation, athletes, be able to speak their language, and otherwise you won't be taken seriously. You won't be able to get anywhere. Yeah. Awesome speaking with her. Again, she was just a bundle of joy.